Good evening, everyone. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, our beloved Guru Deva, Paramahansa Yoganandaji, saints of all religions, beloved Swamiji, we humbly bow before you all. Divine Mother, great masters of self-realization, help us to be ever increasingly aware of the divine energy flowing through us, of the infinite vitality. Help us to see how to bring that into this world, raising our energy and offering it to all souls, to all of your children. Keep our hearts open and uplifted, and remove all obstacles from our path. We are thine, Mother. We are longing to come home to thee. Bring us home. Om. Peace. Amen.
Mother, bathe me in thy
Let's meditate together now for just a few minutes. We'll only meditate for a few minutes. So very quickly, very immediately, focus your attention at the point between the eyebrows. Bring all of your concentration there. And with deep energy, in silence and inwardly, call to Master, call to God right now. Reveal thyself. Reveal thyself. Amen. We'll listen to Swami Kriyananda now sing Deirdre's song.
With sorrow and grieving, all my brief life I have known. Happiness is like a faded leaf on the wild, wild winds blown. Oh, the wild winds ever blow. What is beauty? What is love? What is trust when nothing's true? It's a dark world, dark with pain. Give me freedom for my own. Oh, it's sorrow and grieving, all my brief life I have known. Happiness is like a faded leaf on the wild, wild winds blown. Oh, the wild winds ever blow. What is beauty? What is love? What is trust when nothing's true? It's a dark world, dark with pain. Give me freedom for my own. And so on.
When I was asking one of the other men who sings quite a bit, I said, what is Deirdre's song? Because it was the song that was listed as one of the antidotes to depression. And he started singing this song for me. And I said, oh my Lord, that's the saddest song I've ever heard. I just couldn't imagine. I thought, we're just going to depress ourselves and everybody who's watching. But just before we started tonight, I actually listened to the words, and it's really quite perfect because it went by quickly. But what Swamiji is writing about is how dark it is, how lonely it is, how much sadness there is, how any happiness flies away like leaves from a tree in this world. And he says in the end, each time he sings it, give me freedom for my own. And he's saying this soul needs to be free. And it's only in soul freedom, not in any worldly way, that not only can we not know happiness, but again, he wrote this song about darkness. I think he uses the word gloom. I can't remember exactly right now, but it's actually the perfect song when speaking about the antidote for depression. Swamiji has given 3 weeks in his book of secrets to this topic of depression, secrets of emotional healing. So he's talking about what are the secrets of dealing with each of these feelings. And he does 3 weeks for depression. We're only going to give it 2. But today it's very interesting because if I look through the body of work that both Swamiji and Master have written, or classes they've given, or talks they've given, there's not much that either of them said with regard to depression specifically. And yet he gives 3 days out of the month for depression. So I said to myself, let me just look up the epidemiology of depression, because when, as all of you know, I was a what we call in this country a general internist for all of my medical career. I did have a subspecialty in the field of drug addiction and chemical dependency, but I was trained as an internist, and I saw that means you see adult patients with all kinds of medical problems. So you sort of see everybody, but you're not a specialist in any one area. But what you very quickly come to see as a general internist is that many, many people come in with a lot of complaints or concerns. I don't mean complaining in a bad way, but that's a word we use in medicine. It's probably not a a good phrase. We call it, what is your chief complaint? So it's a way of talking about what somebody's presenting with. What do they perceive as their problem? And although the chief complaint can be varied, in a very high percentage of office visits, you come to see very quickly that the underlying problem is actually depression. And the unfortunate piece of that is that many doctors don't like to talk about that. They don't like to ask questions about people's mental health or their situation at home. You know, for me to meet somebody new and not say, how's your marriage going? How's your relationship going? And many, many other, what a lot of doctors would just consider personal questions. And they are, of course they are. But I always felt, how could I actually really ever take care of somebody or come to the root cause of a problem if I wasn't asking these kinds of questions? Because if somebody's really miserable at home, or if they hate their job, that can present physically in many ways, but in a very high percentage of the time, if you treat the underlying cause, if you help them resolve issues in relationships, not just with partners, but it could be with their children or with their parents or with a best friend, or you help them find the ability, might mean courage, willpower, even the ability to see that they need to change their work. Everything changes. I remember when I had a very, very large practice of medicine, which you know, and one time a really dear friend of mine came to see me. She was also an internist, although she had started out her training in obstetrics and gynecology, but for a lot of reasons that don't matter, she left that and she went back to medicine. And we sort of worked side by side. I mean, not literally, but we were both in the same town practicing medicine together. And one day she came to see me as a patient now, with a multitude of medical complaints and concerns, feeling very concerned that something was really wrong with her because she couldn't make this constellation of symptoms work. And those of us in the field of medicine know that when the symptoms don't add up to something, when it looks too strange to be something, I would say now, though this is even a bit of a misnomer in itself, but something physical, something physiologic, chances are it's not. And the more mature you get in the field of the practice of medicine, the more you know that. You get a feel for right away what's happening here. Is there a major medical problem? Is there not? And she was just telling me all of these symptoms that she had been living with, and she was really concerned about herself. So she just told me everything, and then I said to her, how are things? She said, what do you mean things? I said, well, aside from your concern about your body, how's your marriage? How's things with your husband? I called him by name, of course, because I knew him. She said, great, we're doing great. And I asked her about a number of other things, and then I said, how's work? And she started saying to me, I'm just hating practicing medicine these days. I'm hating it. And she went on to tell me all of the reasons. This was at the very beginning of HMOs taking over medicine. Probably many of you watching are too young to remember that. But there was a day that was pre-HMO, or now we're in HMO. And at the very beginning of HMOs, it was torturous for many of us, for a lot of reasons that I don't want to go into, but they did dictate how we practiced medicine. It was a very painful change. Anyway, she spoke very passionately about it, we did a whole host of tests on her, and she, after all, was a very smart physician herself, so I had to run enough tests to help her see that there was really nothing that we could find in her body. But then I said to her, I think you're depressed. And you could just see that it stopped her. But I said to her, listen to yourself. How many hours a day are you spending practicing medicine? And she said, like most of us, 12 to 16 hours a day. I said, and you hate every minute of it. She said to me, what do you think I ought to do? And I said to her, find another profession, which was not what she expected to hear. She had put a lot of time and energy, never mind medical school and training. Then you develop a practice, you gather patients. It's huge. But I said to her, why would you stay where you're miserable? This is a true story. She got a real estate license. This was just prior to this huge boom of real estate in the Bay Area. She started selling houses to people. She loved it, and she made a fortune, way more than we were ever going to make in medicine. She came back and she saw me a year and a half later. She said, I have never felt better in my life. She said, as crazy as I thought you were when you first said that to me. She said, literally. I said, what was I thinking when I came to see Shanti? But then she said, wait a minute, I knew what I was thinking when I came to see Shanti, so let me listen to her. Anyway, she's still selling real estate. She's still happy. I don't know about right now, in the middle of this pandemic, but just prior to the pandemic. So, a long way, but a meaningful way of saying that so much of what troubles people in the world has its base in depression, in mood changes. 7 to 9% of adults in the United States say that they have had a major bout of depression. That is a lot of people. And still, and we call 18 and older adults, the highest incidence is in 18 to 25-year-olds, and an extraordinarily high number. I didn't look this up today, so I'm not going to quote it, but I'm saying this thoughtfully. A very high percentage of office visits in primary care medicine is because of depression, are because of depression. It's a remarkable concern, at least in the West. I will say that. And honestly, as my practice expanded to include people, as we became more what we call global, but pretty soon your practice is as much, they're all multicultural. Then you find out that whatever country you're seeing people from, depression looks the same. It may not be talked about as much in their culture, but depression is a huge issue for most people. So, having said all of that, let me go back and read to you the first, actually I'll read the first and second week of Swamiji's Secrets of Emotional Healing with regard to depression. The first one is, the secret of overcoming depression is useful activity devoted selflessly to helping others. The secret of overcoming depression is useful activity devoted selflessly to helping others. We call that seva on this path. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about it. But I'm going to read the second one before I speak. The secret of overcoming depression is not to try reasoning your way out of the slump, but vigorously to raise your level of energy from the heart to the brain, then channeling it outward in creative activity or in useful service to others. So let me read that one more time. The secret of overcoming depression is not to try reasoning your way out of the slump. Don't try reasoning your way out of the slump, but vigorously, very important word, vigorously raise your level of energy from the heart to the brain, he says, then channel it outward in creative activity or in useful service to others. So Swamiji is really talking about two concepts in these first, well, several. Let me not limit this to two because it's not two. The first thing he says right away is one of the major ways to get through depression or over depression, I would say, is by serving other people. And as I said, we call this seva. We talk about serving really without regard for what's coming back our way. We call that something different. We call that nishkam karma. But for right now, let me just say, honestly, it's the same for seva. Nothing gets you, psychologically, it's true that it will get you outside of yourself if you start thinking about just somebody else. What do they need? How can I help them? What can I give them? What can I give to make this event at the temple be the best it could be? How can I help my friends and take a little bit of their work off of their plate? How could I go home and make a beautiful meal for my family tonight that I know would please them? It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't need to be anything life-saving in a way. It's that very thought of what can I do for somebody else. So psychologically, it gets us outside of ourselves. That's true. And very often, for many years before I had Swamiji's words behind it, I would frequently say to people, have you thought about going to the Salvation Army and serving over the holidays? Have you thought about showing up at some soup kitchen? Have you, just whatever it is, have you thought about offering your services and tutoring in a school? Not because you need the money, but because there are so many students who could use one-on-one help, and you could do that. So have you thought about doing that? You're sitting at home, you might be a little bored. Often, I would say this, particularly in the early days, honestly, when as many women were not working as they are now. Very bright, competent, energetic, sometimes even highly trained women would be sitting at home all day, either taking care of little children all the time. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course. I know that can be wonderful. And if you love that as a full-time job, there's nothing more joyful. But if you don't happen to be one of the women who loves that, if you miss relating to adults, using your mind in a different way, I saw a lot of this. So saying to somebody, spend 4 hours a week giving some of your time and energy away would just change people's lives. I did that a lot. Then you come onto a spiritual path where really, just like what Swamiji was saying in this song, you're noticing that it's very hard to take care of solving the problems of the mind at the level of the mind. It's hard to solve problems in this world, disappointments of all different types, frustrations of all different types, by finding something in the world that's going to take care of it. It might for a while. It absolutely might. But when you're solving your problem in an outward way, it's just a guarantee that that's going to come back and the wave's going to have to go the other way. And you're going to find yourself in that depression again. It's the way it is. One of the few things that Swamiji and Master both say in the little bit that they've written about this is that Master says very clearly, I'm not going to look to find his words, but that one big cause of depression is about overindulging sexually and sensually. Sensually means anything that feeds our senses. And he says, when you do that, there's an agony that comes with it. Later, we call it depression. He talks about it even in past lives. If you've overindulged in past lives, you can be feeling the agony of that in this life because you will keep searching for it. You will keep trying to fill that hole in those same ways, and it will never work. So overindulgence here leads to depression, which just sends you back over here, and you've created a vicious cycle. And he says that in several different of his lectures, of his preceptive teachings that we read. So we can't solve our problems, whatever they are, out in the world. So we have to look for some, as we've been talking about for weeks, and as we'll always talk about, what is the spiritual solution and how does that work? Now let me interrupt myself for 1 minute here. I said this last week several times, and I want to say it again. There are people in this life who are born with a physiologic depression. They just come in, they're depressed. I'll say to them, when's the first time you noticed your depression? They'll say to me, I've been depressed all my life. And I know almost for sure in those instances, if I give them an antidepressant, a pill, they will feel better. There is such a thing as physiologic depression. It doesn't take it out of the spiritual realm. It doesn't. It doesn't mean we have to be committed to having that depression. But I'm saying it out of respect for people who struggle with depression. Depression is big. Maybe this is why Swamiji gave it 3 weeks. Maybe it's why 7 to 9% of the people in the US say they've had a major episode of depression. Maybe it's why if you look at this medically, I'm taking a little leeway here with how I'm speaking because I know I have next week, but it's important to say what I'm saying. I looked up today, when I was looking up the epidemiology of depression, and I was just in a medical search engine, it amazed me that there were articles on depression and cancer, depression and heart disease, depression and responses to chemotherapy, depression and recovery from surgery. I'm saying it, and every one of those fell just where you think it would. People who are depressed have a higher incidence of malignancies, and they don't do as well with the treatment. People who are depressed have a higher incidence of heart disease. It goes on and on. It's a pretty remarkable phenomenon. So I feel respectful of that. Remember what I said in the introduction to this class. I'm not against anything. I am for whatever you need. I have written many, many prescriptions for antidepressants and for referrals to therapists. And I still will, I'm sure, because God is in all of that. God can come to us in all of those ways. And if in this life or in this moment in this life, what you need to even lift you high enough that you can then work on this from a spiritual perspective, then take a medicine. I've said this over and over. It's so important to me to be respectful of people who are listening and who will listen, and people who have depression or anxiety or many of the other states that we'll talk about. They're real, and we have to respect that in ourselves and in other people. And sometimes I've said to people, because they will come to me because I'm a spiritual teacher and I'm a spiritual counselor and a spiritual director. It's what I do. So they want to come and work their way through this spiritually, but they're not really ready. They're struggling with a different vibration that may need to be dealt with first with some medicine. And there are times where I say to people, maybe we'll give you a little medicine. It'll help elevate your mood, and we can take it from there and start moving spiritually. Very reasonable approach to me. Or I've said to people many times, I'm going to refer you to a psychotherapist. I think I said this too, but I don't want you to quit seeing me. Keep seeing me, because I will help support you spiritually, but you actually need some therapy. We need to get our egos strengthened enough to move on from there. The spiritual path takes a strong sense of self before we can move on. These are all very important things to talk about. If you are so depressed that you can't get out of bed in the morning, or you're not showering, or you're not eating, you're not going to go down to any of the places that we could send you to serve other people. First, we have to help you get out of bed. That's simply the truth, and there's nothing wrong with that. But once you're out of bed, once you're functioning at any level, once you have the smallest bit of energy that you can lasso and start working with it, then whether you're on medicine or not, whether you're seeing a therapist or not, begin to see how it is that you can. What does Swamiji mean when he says, take your energy and vigorously, use that word, vigorously raise it up to your heart, and then from your heart to your brain. And even if you can't do it vigorously, even if you can just start by doing it a little bit, every little bit of effort that we make matters. If what we can do is serve somewhere 1 hour a week, serve an hour a week. If many people have heard me tell this story, I'm not going to tell the whole story. I'm going to say, suffice it to say, I was in Mexico at what felt like the furthest corner from my earth, and I got very, very sick. And I literally really did think I was dying. And I was telling my 2 girlfriends who were with me, I'm dying. I don't want you to worry about it. Like they weren't going to worry. I was laying on the dirt floor of this little casita, telling them, hey, I'm dying, but don't worry. I was actually more like, I'm sorry, I'm dying. It turns out I was very sick. I actually had contracted hepatitis in the US, by the way, before I went to Mexico, but nonetheless. And I felt my life force leaving me. I was laying on the ground dying, and I might have died. Hepatitis can be a very serious thing. This is why I'm telling this story, because I remembered in a talk I had just heard that Swamiji, in a moment when he was in trouble, with a disembodied being that he had invited in because he wanted to see what that experience was like. True story. Suddenly he realized the disembodied being was dark and it was winning the argument. I mean, think of that as a depression. They're analogous, the way I'm telling the story. And as soon as he realized that, he started screaming, that's how he describes it, I would say vigorously, for Master. And the minute he screamed for Master, that being was gone. Now, I was laying on this floor dying, and all of a sudden, just like a little thought form, oh yeah, it was like in slow motion. I remember that story, but I was so weak. I'm telling you this, I want you to hear this and feel the energy for a reason. Laying on this floor, I'd lost what I think were gallons through perspiration. My blood pressure was low, my heart rate was about 150, very what we call thready. You could hardly find it. So I was going like this, Master, Master, just like that. The weakest little voice, it was all I could do, but I kept repeating it. And over minutes, this illness had been going on for hours, and over minutes, I started feeling the life force returning, little by little. It took a while, but it doesn't matter. The point is, I gave it whatever energy I had. Now, I'm not giving myself too much credit because 10 minutes before, I was being a great yogi and being courageous about dying, and I'd forgotten to call on Master. I mean, it's not a good story. I don't look so good in the story, let me put it that way. It's a very good story in that as soon as I started finding that energy and raising it at all and calling to Master, I started feeling better. That was a profound lesson for me. It was one of the moments, one of millions, it's probably not hyperbole, of moments in this life for me when I've had to remember, then the thought comes, call on Master. Master's right here. Be with Master. We remind ourselves. That's the point of vigorously raising our energy. It's because we want to be back in tune with Master. And when we get there, we will not be depressed. We will not be anxious. We will not be angry. We will not be any other thing in that book when we're with Master. But we have to get there. So Swamiji says, vigorously raise your energy. Well, of course that makes sense, because raising our energy doesn't just mean in an outward way. It means from your heart to your brain, from your heart chakra to the higher chakras, spiritual energy. We are trying to, again, lasso that energy and raise it up. And it's in the transformation of that energy that our mood itself begins to first stabilize, and then it's not what we would call a mood. Depression's a mood. Anxiety is a mood. But the more centered we get, and the more energy can flow freely through us, the less moods we have. And another lesson here is to do the very best we can do to not give those moods energy. We don't want to let that energy be seeping out. This is why Swamiji in the Raja Yoga class or maybe it is when he's talking about Patanjali. I'm trying to think, is it Patanjali? But I think it's Swamiji. When he talks about, it's in his interpretation of Patanjali. Now it just came to me. He talks about at first what we're walking around with are leaky buckets, and we're trying to collect. He uses the analogy of milk, but the milk is like milk and honey. It's our spiritual energy. It's our life force. But not if there's holes in the bucket. We can't do that. So the first thing we have to do is fill those holes. And as we fill the holes, whatever we put in there will stay. Well, that's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to stop that outward flow of energy. We're trying to quit being mesmerized or drawn by that outward flow of energy. You know, those moods that we have, those emotions, they're very, you know, you have to forgive me. I'm teaching a lot these days, and I'm saying to myself, did I just say all of this 2 weeks ago, or have I said it in another talk? Doesn't really matter. It's very important. We can't say it too much. Even depression, and I do not mean this disrespectfully, when the depression is profound and intense and it has you, that's one thing. There are people who are psychotically depressed, who are suicidally depressed. These are severe depressions when people are actually thinking of killing themselves. And I'm not referring to what I'm about to say would not be in reference to those intense states. But there's a lot of depressive moods that are very seductive. They grab us. And if we get honest with ourselves, and it takes a large degree of honesty, we begin to, enjoy is going to be a too strong of a word for most people, but we find it familiar, we find it safe. Those are not such strong words. To be a little less energetic, a little lower, to be feeling sorry for ourselves, to be working ourselves into a worse and worse and worse mood. We've all been there, and many of us have been what we would call depressed, and it can look like that. This is not the severe depression. Swami Kriyananda tells a story, I think in the path, where he hadn't seen Master in a while, and Master asked for somebody to carry something heavy up to him. Swamiji hadn't seen him. Oh, it was like a 5-gallon water jar or something like that. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. So Swamiji said, so I assigned the task to myself. And he took the water up, and he said, I made way more noise than would have been necessary for that task, hoping that Master would notice him and call him in and say, I haven't seen you for a long time. Come, let me give you a blessing. Now, we can all relate to that, wanting to be noticed. We sometimes, maybe we dress a little more seductively than we have other times, or we speak a little more loudly, or we answer more questions in class, or whatever. Many ways that probably many of us have had of getting attention for ourselves. Swamiji was doing his version of that. Master just kept working. And Swamiji said for days after that, he started telling himself, I knew Master didn't really care about me. Why would he care about me? I'm one of his youngest disciples. Of course he doesn't care about me. I don't even know how to be a disciple. And he was doing his version of what probably every one of us has done. And, or let me just say for sure, I've done it many times over the course of my life. And then he said, one day he just said to himself, this is crazy. You've got to get yourself out of this mood. And he said he went down to his little apartment, which was kind of underground in Mount Washington, and he said, with such force and such energy, I brought all of my attention to the point between my eyebrows. He said, in a minute, the mood was gone. In a minute. He said, and I said to myself, of course he can't stop with every disciple. Of course he cares about you. If he stopped with you and every other disciple, how would he ever get his writing done? Because he had been writing in the room that day. But he said that he noticed how seductive the mood was, how he was building a bigger and bigger and bigger story for it, until he said to himself, stop, raise your energy. And to the best of our ability, the spiritual path is directional. When I was laying on the floor in that casita, whispering to Master, I may as well have been screaming his name. The minute I turned my attention in that direction to call on God, I need you right now. I need your help. Instantaneously, God was with me. God's always with me. It was me that had to turn in that direction. So let me just for tonight, before I stop, bring all of this back and bring it to a center of focus for you. I didn't talk as much about serving, but I will next in 2 weeks. But remember that when we're serving other people, it's a kind thing to do in the world. And if that's where we start, let's just do it. But that very act of serving, of drawing something up through yourself and putting it out into the world, through your heart, offering it in any shape or form, under any condition, it changes us. It transforms us. It moves energy. The more we can say no to Satan, no to the mood. I've been depressed enough. It doesn't hold the same appeal to me anymore. At least for this hour, or these 2 hours, or this day, I'm going to leave it. We can always even tell ourselves, it'll be there if we come back to it. And I promise you it will be. You know, Satan's got a hold on us. Delusion is powerful. We don't ever have to worry that we won't be able to find it if we want it. It'll be there. We can get back to it. Sometimes we need to do that. Sometimes we do. We just need to feel sorry for ourselves. Fair enough. But step out of it every once in a while. Offer something to somebody. Think about energy flowing up through your heart. Don't wait for the energy to come that you can then work with. Grab your own energy. Raise it up. Use it. This has to come from within us. The answer is not out there. It never is. No matter how painful the situation is, no matter how often I could say to somebody, I totally understand. I really understand. This is awful. Would I leave it there? No, I wouldn't. I would allow them whatever room they needed just to feel my caring, my compassion, my empathy. But then to say, are you ready to move on from there? Would you like help changing that? I'm telling you how I've practiced for years, respectfully. Are you ready to move with this? Most people will say yes. Most people, most of us, this is us. We don't realize how attached we are to it. That's probably a good thing. We say, yeah, help me feel better. And we start feeling better. And I'm saying this honestly, don't be surprised if it terrifies you, because it's terrifying. It's change. It's something we've known ourselves in one way, which is less than who we are. Always less than who we are. Now we're saying, wait a minute, I'm much more than that. I don't even need that. I can actually quit being depressed, at least a fair amount of the time, and I will feel free, not lost, free. And I'm saying a lot, and I know people have often said to me, of course I want to feel better. Of course. They start feeling better and they're terrified. And I do understand it. I would never make fun of that. That's when we need to help each other the most, or help ourselves the most. Maybe you'll remember, Shanti said if I start feeling better, it's actually going to frighten me. We wouldn't think that, would we? Wow, I feel better. We think it would just be all better. No, often it's not. That's okay. Just don't go running all the way back. It does get better. It keeps getting better. Then we say, look at this. I'm not depressed, and I feel wonderful. I feel much more energy. I can make things happen in my life more. This is where Swamiji tells the story of the bird in the cage. The bird's been in the cage so long, you open the cage and thinking you're going to let that bird free, but the bird doesn't want to go free. It's terrified. So are we. But we can't let our fear become our captor. That's not the way to live this life. That's not why any of us are together tonight. We're looking for that spiritual, for the door that leads us to spiritual freedom. And all of these secrets, that's exactly what they are. So we'll come back in 2 weeks and we'll speak more about this same topic. Sai Ganesh, are there any questions right now? I can't hear you. Oh, if anyone has a question to ask, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, and we'll see if we can give you an answer. And if not, okay. I'm sorry, I'm up here with lights, and there are so many of you that you're tiny. So Sai Ganesh is going to send me a question.
Can you clarify the difference between the medical definition of depression and what most people think of as depression? For example, how depression might manifest as anxiety or hyperactivity and not always as sadness.
Do I want to repeat the question he's asking me? So the question is, what is the exact medical definition of depression as opposed to people who feel anxious and might it be an underlying depression, or they're feeling something else and it's an underlying depression? It's actually a little more medically technical and complicated a question than I'm prepared to answer right now. It's a good question, but let me say this. There is an exact medical, not just one definition, but classification of many, many types and levels of depression, many different names in this category of what I'm referring to as depression. So, and I can't go through that. You could actually Google that. You could just Google and say, give me the exact medical definitions and subcategories of depression, and you can find it. What's more important for me is, and I would say this even in friendships and in relationships, is to pay the kind of attention to somebody so that whether somebody's coming in and saying, I have chronic headaches, which could be anything, they could be anything, but they can also be depression. I have chronic, severe, diffuse body pain, could be anything medical, but it could also be depression. And to be listening carefully and to ask enough of the right questions. And this does take some experience and skill, but even as friends or partners, if we become good listeners, if we listen instead of trying to jump in and fix each other right away, which is a serious problem that most of us have. But if we can listen well, we can often hear even untrained people better than many doctors, if not most doctors, but at least many doctors. Listen and you say, how does that mood feel? What are the words that they're using? Are their words colorful or are they shades of gray? How do they hold their body when they talk to you? Just where are they looking? You know, we talk about body language. If somebody's sitting like this or this, are they more likely to be depressed than if they're this, or than if they're this, are they anxious? So it's a little more complicated question than I can answer, but you can hear that we can all listen better and we'll know more about each other. I hope that at least answers a part of that question.
Here's another question. What happens to someone spiritually when they take medication for depression? Does it affect one's spiritual journey or slow down progress?
So the question is, what happens to us spiritually when we take medicine for depression? Will it slow down or inhibit spiritual progress? And I'm going to say, I don't know if Swamiji or Master ever specifically answered that question, so I'm going to step out on a spiritual limb and I'm going to say no, it doesn't. I mentioned in the introductory class, how when I give people prescriptions for medicines, not just antidepressants, but any medicine, I tell them, put the medicine on your altar. Every atom in creation is a manifestation of infinite cosmic consciousness. Every atom in creation. There are no exceptions. That antidepressant is not an exception. Now, it is true that certain, and particularly even more intense, psychiatric medicines can subdue or sedate people or can cause different issues. There's no doubt about it. So we're always weighing, what are we medicating? What are the potential side effects of the medicine versus the side effects of the condition that we're treating? And if somebody is able to receive that medicine with right attitude and right mindedness, I honestly don't think, and the right attitude and right mindedness, it's very important, and maybe I'll talk more about this next week because we're running over, but I want to finish my sentence. I don't think, my experience has been with now 50 years, that's 50 years, in the practice of medicine, I don't think we can hurt ourselves. Right attitude, right mindedness. That doesn't mean abusing meds. That doesn't mean taking too many of the wrong meds. That doesn't mean running away from the world by overly medicating ourselves. It means taking medicine and with a sincere desire, effort, willingness. Sometimes the willingness is hard when you're depressed. That comes a little later. But a true desire to be better. We need medicines. God made medicines too. What a miracle penicillin was. What a miracle so many chemotherapeutic agents are. People live through diseases now. There's cures for so many diseases that when I started in medicine, it was just a given you were going to die from it. So many of them. That's not a bad thing. Medicines are not inherently bad. How we use them, how we relate to them, who's helping us take them, there can be issues. But I do not think antidepressants in and of themselves will slow somebody's spiritual progress. You know, we're not all at the same, we don't all have the same karma. We're not all at the same place on a spiritual path. We need different things in different lifetimes. Taking an antidepressant with willingness, with integrity, with a desire to be well, with the hope that it will help us be able to relate better to God, that's a good thing. That I know for sure. So I understand there are multiple, many layers of complexity to that question and the answers to it. But the answer that I want to leave us all with today is no. If people really need antidepressants, it's not a bad thing. Again, pray over your medicines. Leave them on your altar. When you take them, invite Master or Swamiji or any great saint in. You come to me through this medicine. You heal me. Let me feel you. Help me awaken this energy and neutralize it. Literally neutralize it. Help me release the hold that these moods have on me. Pray over it in the right way. Talk to God. The right way means positive, moving in the right direction, wanting to be better. There's no right words for God. Yeah. We'll end now for tonight, but if you have more questions, please hold on to them, send them to me in an email, and I'll answer them next week or ask them next week when we're together. Good night, everyone, and bless you all.